Birmingham is the second biggest city in UK, and look at the state of it, and look at London. We're nowhere near there. So it's a very shame. This is a disaster for Labour. I've got to say, look at the rats. The rats are even not scared of. I've seen the cat. The cat's running away from the rats. That's how big they are. I'm not like that serious.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm Lukas Degutis, and today we're going to be talking about the bin strike in Birmingham. It's been going on for several weeks now, and people are concerned it's going to become somewhat of a health issue. I will be joined by Shakeel Afsar, who is an activist living in Birmingham, who will tell us his experiences and suggest his solutions. And then we'll talk to PopCon director Mark Littlewood, who has written in The Telegraph that we should be blaming Birmingham's Labour-run council and the absurd equal pay bill for this waste fiasco. But first, we have a local reporter in Birmingham who's been speaking to some of the residents there.
The bins, there be so much rubbish, you won't believe it everywhere. And what people are doing, they're emptying their bins and putting it outside other places. They put them in outside our shop as well. Plus, the council tax they put up. Why aren't they paying the bin people? They're charging us extra money and they're not paying them. I feel sorry for them because they do hard work. Our kids are suffering because they're getting ill because of that. No one's bothered about no one. Labour is just thinking about themselves. They put everything up and they're not paying them. It's a shame. Shame on Labour. Birmingham is the second biggest city in UK. And look at the state of it. And look at London. We're nowhere near there.
Shakeel, thank you for joining us on Spectator TV. Could you paint a picture of what exactly is happening in Birmingham right now?
It's absolutely a war zone. We have bins on every single corner. We have rats, literally the size of cats, roaming our streets, and it's become a cesspit of rubbish on every single corner. And it's actually quite shameful, really, that the council has allowed it to get this bad. And the fact that you can't walk down any street without having to forcibly move off the pavement and walk into the road because the streets are covered in mountains, literal mountains of rubbish.
And is this in an area that you're currently living in?
Yeah, so I'm currently in the Moseley area, which is in the Hall Green constituency. The Hall Green constituency comprises of areas such as Hall Green, Sparkhill, Sparkbrook, Moseley, Borsalith, and adjoins with other areas like Small Heath, Tyseley, which are all currently in the bin strike area.
I see. And when exactly did this start and why?
Well, according to our knowledge, for quite a few months, there's been disputes between the bin collectors and Birmingham City Council, and quite rightly, the bin collectors union. And we've been hearing on and off that there's issues that have been taking place in regards to pay wages and disgruntled bin workers. We've only ever pushed our local councillors to try to make sure that we never get to see this day to day. But unfortunately, one can only put it down to incompetence that we have actually got to when we are the largest city council in Europe with a nearly £3 billion budget, that we've got to a place where we cannot keep our streets clean anymore.
And who do you personally blame for this? Do you think it's the council's problem, irrespective of what party, or is this a Labour Party problem, or is this also tying in problems being caused by the strikers themselves?
Well, I, to be honest with you, me personally, and people may differ with their opinions, I believe it is a Labour problem, because the Birmingham City Council is actually controlled by Labour councillors. They do have the majority in the House, and the fact that I understand, and some of the actions by the bin workers have not been things that I would agree with, but it all stems back to the epicenter of the problem. Why is it that bin workers are having their wages cut? And why is it that we are not able to get to some negotiation table? And I boil that really down to the fact that the Birmingham City Council has been spending money on vanity projects and now has their hands financially tied and is kind of using workers as scapegoats to, cover up their financial mess and financial rubbish that they've created.
We've actually had a reporter out in Birmingham, and she has spoken to local residents, and one of them says he's getting lots of letters about voting, but isn't quite sure who he could actually trust his vote with, and who would solve this issue and would make sure that in future such things do not repeat. In your opinion, what would your response to this resident be?
Well, my response to this resident would be that you've seen for many years indigenously, the Labour Party has controlled this particular area in regards to its councillors and its members of parliament. With myself standing as the independent candidate in this area and coming second with nearly 7,500 votes, I would urge that resident to look in another direction. We from the ICA, which is the Independent Candidate Alliance, which has been set up by myself and Mr. Ahmed Yaqub, who was a mayoral candidate and a candidate in the general election. And we believe that we need more independent candidates who live on these streets, who live amongst residents, rather than Labour councillors and Labour members of parliament who cannot actually speak the truth without getting the tap on the back from, London NEC or London Labour high-ranking officials. So we believe that the power must be brought back into the community, and our community actually realized, if you take a walk down some streets, people actually have woken up to the fact that, look, what have these councillors actually done? It's all well and good them pouring high vises on now with gloves and showing that we're picking up the rubbish. But the simple fact is that the rubbish should not have been there, and it should not have become such a major issue. I'll give you one example. There's a local school probably half a mile away from here, which was on the media, and all the videos were going viral because there was a mountain of rubbish. Now, again, incompetence by Labour councillors. Why would you have a collection point right opposite a school where there's already parking problems, which in turn, by you having a refuse collection at between 8 and 12, there were so many children that went into school late. The traffic was horrendous, and everyone's seen the videos. And again, I believe that it brings it down to incompetence. Whichever councillor who's in charge of this particular area arranged this collection, good, job well done. We do need our rubbish collected. But the sheer incompetence to do it outside a school where there's already parking issues, where there's already an issue where we've got, child safety at hand, and we've got a mountain of rubbish and lines and lines of people who are trying to do the right thing and dispose of their rubbish in an appropriate manner.
We've had reports also that some people are privately hiring bin collection. In your experience, have you noticed that, or some areas?
I'm a property developer by trade, born and raised into the property field. I'm a private landlord also. We have a great portfolio of properties in and around the Birmingham area. And you're right, I've had to use my own financial means to go to my properties and load up the rubbish into our vans and then pay £80 a time to have that rubbish disposed, because I know it's not my problem because all my tenants are paying council tax, but just for my my tenants, the local area, I've been personally doing that, and I know likewise many other people are doing that. Recently, another video that went viral was from a imam from a local masjid called Shakeel Afsar Rashid, where he actually went to the streets and has actually taken a proactive approach in physically picking litter up himself, and and so guiding the community that even though we have lousy, incompetent councillors from the Labour Party, we have to spearhead this ourselves. That's why a lot of the streets in Birmingham are clean, but even though that there's no bin collections because people are making alternative arrangements. But unfortunately, there are some areas where people are so deprived, and with the cost of living, they just can't take time out to go to the tip because either they're stuck at work, or when they finish work, the tips are closed. We suggested to the Birmingham City Council that the local recycling centre should be open freely for people to come and go, because currently it's a booking system. So unless you can get a booking, you can't throw your rubbish, and it makes it very difficult, not only for people who are working, but people who might not be as tech savvy. We have a very large elderly community within this area who do things the analog way. And it's sad because even with my local road and local area, we've been pinpointing any vulnerable people and assisting them, when really it should be the job of the Birmingham City Council and, more importantly, the Labour Party.
And the government's actually now sending a minister to Birmingham after pressure mounted. I mean, do you have much hope that's going to change anything?
Well, I think with mounting pressure against Labour, I think they will make some drastic changes, because unfortunately it's not doing so well for them in itself. If you look at the last general election, the independent candidates took massive chunks out of the Labour vote bank, and now with this incompetent behaviour, it's only further reinforcing everyone's narrative that we shouldn't be voting for people who can't actually answer to their constituents and take orders from London. We should be voting for people who are within the area, who could be called upon immediately and have concerns. Like, for example, the member of parliament that I went against in the last general election, he's completely absent. He's discussing critical issues overseas, which are right, but when there's a major incident declared in your constituency, then I think that takes precedent to anything that's happening overseas, because ultimately a member of parliament should discuss our foreign policy and international issues. But when there's a major issue in your own streets and you're silent to it, it just reinforces the level of incompetence by the Labour Party and the way that they, for many, many years, have looked away from our people, not realizing our people are not only becoming more politically active. We are a community that is indigenously, being very quiet and not involved in politics. But now moving forward, the younger generation very much so is getting involved. And I can definitely tell you, we'll be holding these people to account when the time comes in the ballot box.
And just on your point on independent candidates, I mean, in the last general election, many of them, I think, united or got lots of support from the public in certain areas of the country in which there was concern for what's happening in Gaza overseas. Do you think that the conversation is going to shift away from that and more onto domestic problems?
Well, some of the candidates did start their candidacy on the issue of Gaza. We have quite a few of them. With myself personally, I became politically active in 2019 when we had the issues around schools. And I firmly agree that a lot of people, the Gaza issue only motivated people to realize that the representatives we have are not the representatives we want. And that with itself brings a whole lot of other issues, because then people start to wake up. All it takes is one issue to ignite the flame of thought in somebody's mind to then think, okay, now we must discuss this issue. So I absolutely agree with you that we will be concentrating on local issues within our community, whether it's knife crime, whether it's drug crime, whether it's the rubbish pandemic. But it's a damn shame when all the cards are in the hands of the council and the Labour councillors, yet we still have rubbish on our streets, because we have many vanity projects that have taken place. When I mean vanity projects, we have bike lanes in areas where the communities either don't cycle or either are not motivated to cycle. We've had the Olympic Village built here that's just sitting empty. We've had many vanity projects that they do not serve the community in any way, shape, or form. It just seems like the councillors seem to be pretending that they're doing something. So I can tell you that now the local residents are fiercely upset with their councillors, even though if the councillors now come up and try to roll their sleeves up and let's start cleaning the rubbish, which is good in itself, but I don't think it will help, because people have really realised that at the time we needed them, they let us down.
Well, Shakeel, I wish you all the best, and thank you for joining us on Spectator TV. Mark, could you explain a little bit more about what this dispute is about? Because we've had a lot of hot air from Labour saying that this is 14 years of Tory austerity and this is the result. Is that accurate?
I don't think that's accurate at all. I mean, the default setting of the Labour government is that almost anything that goes wrong in any part of the country is blamed on 14 years of Conservative austerity. But we don't have rubbish piling up on the streets in most parts of the United Kingdom. So there's clearly something particular about Birmingham City Council. Let's hope we don't see it spread to other towns and cities. But there's something very specific about what's happened in Birmingham, isn't there? Otherwise, we would have tons of rubbish on every street in the United Kingdom. So what might that be? Well, obviously, people are focusing on the immediate issue, our picket lines stopping refuse trucks getting to the area, and there are some immediate issues that need to be dealt with. But I was keen to try and work out what I think the root cause is. And I think the real root cause is that Birmingham City Council has gone bankrupt. And why has it gone bankrupt? Well, there's not a single cause of that, but the biggest issue is a colossal equal pay demand handed down by the courts. Had they avoided that, they wouldn't be in the most robust financial health, that's true, but they probably would be in a position in which they could actually keep the streets clean. So I think you need to rewind 18 months or so to when Birmingham had to put in its Section 114 notice, I think it's called, effectively declaring itself bankrupt. Because once you've got a locally bankrupt council, don't be surprised if the bare and essential services start to run into trouble. That's exactly what's occurred.
And Birmingham isn't the only local council practically on its knees when it comes to funding. I mean, how have local councils, I'm thinking of, for example, Croydon in London, how they got into such a mess?
It's extraordinary, isn't it? And I worry somewhat that we've not yet really worked out where the bill falls if a local council gets into trouble. So you may have the economic problem of moral hazard here, that the consequences of going bankrupt for a local government and its local taxpayers, it's not quite the same as the consequence of a company going bankrupt, in which case it liquidates and everybody loses their jobs. We still manage to keep it afloat. But I think that local government has been broadly inefficient. It focuses on the wrong things. But I think they're also too restricted in what they can do. We are about the most centralised country in the Western world. I think it's about 95% of all tax and spend decisions are made in Westminster and Whitehall. So too often, local government authorities are basically carrying out prescribed diktats from central government rather than actually able to experiment with different ways of doing things. Now, you can do that wisely or unwisely. I think Birmingham City Council has been pretty poor in a whole range of areas. I mean, it's wasted a colossal amount of money on an IT system that doesn't work. I mean, we've heard that story so many times before in government. But really, I think the root cause is you've got to look at this liability of north of £700 million on an equal pay claim. If councils are going to be facing those sort of bills handed down by the court, we need to take a long, hard look and actually ask whether we want our government, democracy and judiciary to function in that way. Because hundreds of billions of pounds in equal pay compensation is frankly hundreds of millions of pounds that can't be spent on keeping the roads clean and other vital services. There's a straight trade-off there.
And for those watching who are unfamiliar with the equal pay demand, would you mind just giving a brief synopsis of what this court ruling was?
Yeah, so what happens under the Equalities Act is you've got to ensure that you're not discriminating on the basis of sex, amongst other things, but this was about male and female work. And if it's shown that you are, those you've discriminated against are owed back pay. Now, you might think that at first blush, that sounds like a perfectly fair and normal thing to do. And if it were narrowly applied, I might even be sympathetic to that. For sake of argument, if you had a woman and a man doing exactly the same job, I don't know, as filing clerks, for example, and they filed exactly the same number of pieces of paper over exactly the same time span, you might assume that they should have very equal pay. But unfortunately, but perhaps unsurprisingly, the British courts have taken a much wider view of what equality should mean. So they have started to compare male-dominated sort of jobs, refuse collection would be a good example, in the private sector, working in a warehouse is a good example, with female-dominated jobs, teaching assistant for sake of argument, or if you were to look at the private sector, being a checkout assistant, more likely to be female, and a warehouse man more likely to be a bloke. And they have then reached the conclusion that these jobs are sufficiently similar to warrant a kind of equal remuneration package and the same prospect of career progress and the like. And I think that is a huge overinterpretation of what must have been intended by the Equality Act. You are not comparing like with like, you are comparing apples with pears, and apples and pears are not priced at the same amount. So if we're going to have this extraordinarily wide interpretation about what equal pay means, we better get used to the fact that local authorities, as well as private businesses, are going to need hundreds of millions of pounds to meet these sort of bills. I'd probably do away with the Equality Act altogether, but at the very least, we need to narrow it down to very explicit, provable discrimination claims, not a general view that that jobs that tend to be done by women are paid perhaps less than jobs tend to be done by men. That's not a like-for-like comparison. And if you make it a like-for-like comparison, it becomes colossally expensive for ratepayers and customers if you were looking at the private sector.
Well, I was actually just going to come on to the topic of the Equality Act. It seems like it's not, just this news dominating the headlines right now. It's other things like single-sex spaces, or most recently, the Equality and Human Rights Commission announced that they're considering investigating Labour's welfare reforms to see if they are discriminating against the disabled. So would your solution be to scrap it entirely and perhaps replace it with some legislation that is much more concise and leaves less room for interpretation?
Yes, I mean, I think the problem we've got, not just in this area, but really across the piece in British politics now, is we've tried to take the politics out of politics. We've tried to pretend that there is some wholly neutral judicial legal ruling that can be reached about treating people fairly. And in fact, these are political decisions. Politicians are paid to make decisions that discriminate between different groups. And if you bring in a policy that might, for example, lead to disabled people not doing as well as able-bodied people, can that be litigated, or can that actually just be part and parcel of a government's economic plan that will then be judged at the ballot box? And we've, I think, stripped away from our elected politicians really the ability to exercise wide discretion, because anything that touches on potential discrimination or equality, you basically hit the third rail of British politics, and before you know it, a court tells you that you can't change welfare in this way, or you can't change remuneration in that way. So we've drawn it enormously more widely. I would scrap it altogether, but I think that I could just about see a case that if you were comparing, I don't know, a man and a woman doing exactly the same job to exactly the same level of skill, or a white person and an ethnic minority doing exactly the same job to exactly the same level of skill, then you might be able to raise a complaint if the remuneration was different. But this has now expanded beyond all belief that you can't really do anything. You can't change any policy that might be interpreted as having disproportionate effects on Group A as opposed to Group B. Well, that gives the margin for governments to act as an incredibly narrow one, and I think one that undermines democracy and is seeing us slowly but surely transferring what would have once been considered unambiguously political decisions into becoming judicial decisions. And the Equality Act is one of the key cornerstones, really, of legislation behind that. It's not the only one. I'd make a similar claim about the Human Rights Act, but it's a particularly expensive one. So let's get back to these decisions being political and decided by politicians and judging them at the ballot box, rather than litigating every last detail and case because of the sort of legislation that we put in place. It's a madness.
And Mark, you've also, in your Telegraph piece, you said that Birmingham is a dump is quite a familiar refrain you've heard over the years. I mean, what happened to England's or Britain's once mighty second city?
Yeah, it's right. It's a great shame, and I'm quite fond of the place. I don't know it that well, but my parents met at university there, so I feel a certain sentimentality towards it. I've been back there quite a lot for conferences and meetings. The Conservative Party holds their annual conference there every other year. It's just like so many other of Britain's cities, becomes sort of down at heel. Nothing went specifically wrong. It just looked grubby and dirty. And I think that there's too many parts of Britain that haven't really found their place. I would give my usual refrain that we're trying to get the government to do too much and are not allowing the private sector to breathe enough. And if you want renovation and restoration in some of our great cities, if you want to restore them to the greatness they had, indeed go beyond that, I think you've got to find a way to allow the private sector to do an awful lot more, and frankly, Birmingham City Council and others to do an awful lot less. There seems to be a striking correlation between those parts of the UK that aren't doing so well and the size of the government and the proportion of state spending in those areas. I derive a lesson from that, that you want a rather light touch governmental spending and regulation regime. And if you get a light touch one, you tend to get prosperity following it. So let's get away from central planning and believing that cities should really be designed by mayors, councils and planning committees. And let's get back to it being designed by their own people in their own enterprising fashion. That's what made these cities great in the first place. No grand political central design, but the individual actions, dreams and aspirations of men and women up and down Britain. If we get back to that as a core principle, then I think these sort of cities and places reviving will swiftly follow.
And Mark, I just want to quiz you on something. Someone I spoke to previously who's an activist thought that this will basically give rise to more independent candidates, whether it's in local or general elections. I mean, what's your view on that? Do you think there's a bit more hope for places like Birmingham with more people who lose faith in parties and cast their vote for an independent, or is that just going to cause other problems?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I was looking, we've just seen the tallies for the total number of candidates from each party who will be running in May's local elections. Actually, Reform UK have managed to field more candidates than any other party. And I think there are about 500 candidates, so that's about in 1 in 3 seats, who are running under no party banner at all. And I would keep an eye on them. I think that there is now such a fall off in faith in the mainstream political parties and the political system in general, that we could see all sorts of curious results. Obviously, Reform UK look to benefit from that quite substantially, if you believe the opinion polls at the moment. But I suspect it won't all just end up in the Reform box. Here's the problem, though. It's one thing to vote as a protest for someone who isn't connected to any established legacy political party, but quite how you form a sensible administration out of that is a rather greater challenge. If you elect, I don't know, 10, 15, 20, 25 random independents onto the local council, are they in any way equipped to form an administration? So I fear, although I understand why people might vote this way, I fear it's more of a cri de coeur than it is a proper solution to the problems that we face in many of our towns and cities up and down the country.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you on Spectator TV.
Great to be with you.